All right, let's talk about something that affects every single one of us every single day: our food. For a long time, the global food supply felt, well, pretty stable, right? But that's all changed. What we're seeing now is a high stakes scramble for the basics, and the old rulebook has been completely thrown out the window.
So it really boils down to this one simple question. Can we still import food the same way we did just 20 years ago? The short answer, absolutely not. And the reasons why? Well, they're shaking up everything from global politics to what you and I see on our plates every night.
Okay, let's just rewind the clock for a second, back to 2002. Japan was an absolute giant in the corn market. I mean, look at this. They were buying up 22% of all the corn traded on the entire planet. Think about that. It was a buyer's world, and Japan was king. The whole system was predictable. You knew what to expect.
Now, fast forward to 2021, and wow, the picture could not be more different. Japan's share? It's cratered, down to just 9%. And who's that new big player on the block? China, snapping up 11% of the market. This isn't just a minor adjustment, folks. This is a complete reshuffling of the deck. The game has totally changed.
So, you've got to ask, what's behind this massive shift? Well, the first big piece of the puzzle is pretty simple. The world is getting hungrier. And I mean really hungry. Just look at this number. We're on track to consume 2.86 billion tons of grain this year. That's a mind-boggling amount. And it's not slowing down. That's a jump of 43 million tons from just last year. A lot of that is driven by more people on the planet and rising incomes, especially in developing countries. And yeah, this isn't just a blip on the radar. The world's population is expected to hit 9.5 billion people by 2060. That creates this constant underlying pressure on the entire system. It's the new reality. More people means more demand, period. Okay, so demand is skyrocketing. We get that. But what about supply? Who's actually growing all this grain? Well, the first thing that jumps out is that only a handful of countries grow most of the world's food. When you look at the big three, wheat, corn, and soybeans, you see the same names over and over. The US, China, Brazil, Russia. They are the agricultural superpowers. But here's where it gets really interesting. Just because a country grows a lot of grain doesn't mean they sell it. Take China. They're a huge producer, but they use almost all of it themselves. So the number of countries we all depend on for exports is even smaller. We're talking about a tiny group of nations, the world's bread baskets, that feed everyone else. And that, my friends, makes the whole system incredibly fragile. And that fragile system, it's starting to shake. The supply isn't just concentrated, it's become dangerously unstable. We're looking at a perfect storm of problems that are testing the limits of how we feed the world. First up, you've got geopolitics. I mean, look at what happened when Russia invaded Ukraine. That wasn't just a war in one country. It was a direct hit to one of the world's biggest food exporters. Almost overnight, wheat and corn supplies were choked off, prices went through the roof, and everyone started scrambling. Then there's climate change, and let's be clear, this isn't some far-off problem anymore. It's here. We're seeing intense droughts, crazy floods, and just plain weird weather patterns hitting those same agricultural powerhouses. It makes harvests a total gamble every single year. And finally, there's just the basic problem of moving stuff around. You can grow all the grain in the world, but if you can't ship it, it's useless. And right now, key shipping lanes are in trouble. The Panama Canal is running low on water because of drought. The Suez Canal has become a conflict zone. These are the arteries of global trade, and they're getting clogged. So let's put it all together. You've got soaring demand on one side and a shaky, unpredictable supply on the other. What do you get? You get an all-out global scramble for grain. And this brings us right back to where we started, with Japan. Because the numbers, when you see them side by side, they tell a pretty stark story. Just look at this. Between 2002 and 2021, Japan's slice of the global wheat market was cut in half. We already saw what happened with corn, a total collapse from 22% down to 9%. And soybeans, a nosedive from 9% to a tiny 2%. The bottom line is, in this new, hyper-competitive world, Japan is getting pushed out. And if you want to see just how fierce this competition is, look no further than soybeans. Right now, China buys 59%. Let that sink in. 59% of all soybeans sold on the international market. One country is basically cornering the market for a crucial food source. We've never seen anything like it.
And hey, it isn't just China. You've got other fast-growing countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, and Mexico jumping into the market in a big way. And guess what? They're all trying to buy from the same handful of suppliers as Japan. So you've got way more people trying to get a seat at the dinner table, but the table isn't getting any bigger.
But honestly, this next part is the real jaw-dropper. China isn't just buying food to feed its people today. It's hoarding it. This chart is incredible. China now holds 67% of the world's corn reserves, 57% of its rice, and half of all its wheat. Think about that. More than half of the world's emergency food supply is locked away inside one country, completely off the global market.
So with all this happening on the world stage, what does it actually mean for Japan's future? The ripple effects are huge, and they go way beyond just numbers on a spreadsheet.
This right here tells such a powerful part of the story. Back in 1980, Japan was a powerhouse in global shipping, home to 3 of the world's top 20 ports. But by last year, its top port was ranked 46th. That's a huge drop, and it means it's just plain harder and probably more expensive to get the ships you need to bring food into the country.
And really, that's what this all comes down to, this final question. The world has fundamentally changed. That old, stable system for buying food is gone. What we have now is a fierce, competitive scramble. So in this new world, how does a country make sure there's food on the table for its people, day in and day out? That's the challenge that's going to define the years ahead.
Today, we're going to dig into a question that sits on every single dinner plate in Japan. Just how secure is our food? We're going to uncover where our meals really come from, the anxieties that are kind of simmering just below the surface, and a brand new national plan that's designed to protect our pantry from any global shocks.
So let's just pause for a second. Think about your last meal. You know, that bowl of rice, maybe the slice of toast you had this morning, the meat in your bento box. Where did its journey really begin? Well, as we're about to see, the answer is a whole lot more complex and surprisingly more concentrated than you probably imagine.
Here's our game plan. First up, we'll peek behind Japan's dining table to see our hidden dependencies. Then, we'll get into the rising anxiety this is causing for everyone. After that, we'll break down the new government initiatives for both stable times and for emergencies. And finally, we'll put it all into a global context to see how Japan stacks up.
All right, let's dive right in. To really get a grip on Japan's food situation, you first have to understand just how heavily we rely on imports. I mean, Japan is famous for its incredible cuisine, right? But what's wild is that so many of the core ingredients are actually sourced from thousands of miles away.
The concentration here is just, wow, it's striking. In 2024, Japan's agricultural imports hit a whopping 9.5 trillion yen. And get this, about 60% of that came from just 6 countries. You've got the United States leading the pack, followed by China and Australia. This isn't exactly a diverse portfolio. It's a very, very focused dependency.
And you know, when we zoom in on specific staple foods, it gets even more extreme. Take wheat, for example. Almost every single grain, we're talking 99.8%, comes from just 3 countries, the US, Canada, and Australia. For things like corn and soybeans, the top 2 producers supply over 80 to 90% of everything Japan needs. This creates a massive vulnerability, not just to a bad harvest, but to any kind of political friction or trade dispute with these key partners.
So this level of dependency, it isn't just a number on some government report. It's creating a very real and growing sense of anxiety all across the country, from ordinary people doing their grocery shopping to the CEOs of major corporations. And that anxiety is seriously widespread. A survey from January 2025 came back with a staggering number. 81.2% of Japanese consumers feel anxious about the future of food imports. I mean, think about that. That is more than 4 out of every 5 people.
So, what's really driving this worry? Well, the number one reason, and this was cited by nearly a third of people, is the fear that climate change and natural disasters in those key exporting countries could totally disrupt production. Right behind that are concerns over unstable international situations and just the growing global demand for food, which of course ties right back to that risk we were just talking about. And it's not just us, the consumers. Businesses are feeling the pressure too. Over 60% of food companies share these concerns. But for them, the biggest driver is economic. An absolutely overwhelming 91.8% point to high prices and the weak yen, which makes trying to secure stable, affordable ingredients a constant daily challenge.
Okay, so, faced with all these challenges, what's actually being done? Well, the government is tackling this on two fronts. First, let's look at the proactive stuff, the measures being taken during peacetime, when there isn't an active crisis going on.
The strategy here is really all about strengthening and diversifying the supply chain, not putting all your eggs in one basket. This includes high-level diplomatic talks with major partners like Brazil and Canada to lock in supply commitments. It also involves really practical things like investing in infrastructure, deepening ports so that these massive, more efficient cargo ships can actually dock. And finally, it's about sharing information better and encouraging businesses to find alternative suppliers.
But what happens if a real crisis hits? A major drought, a conflict, a global pandemic. Those peacetime measures might not be enough. And that's exactly where the second part of the strategy comes in, a brand new legal framework designed specifically for emergencies.
This right here is the Food Supply Difficulty Countermeasures Act. It's a bit of a mouthful, I know, but it became law in June 2024. Its purpose is actually pretty simple. Give the government the tools it needs to stop a food shortage from spiraling into a full-blown national crisis and make sure essential foods keep flowing.
So in practice, the law works like a three-stage alarm system. First, at the earliest signs of trouble, a government task force gets together just to monitor the situation. If things get worse, the government can issue a request for cooperation, basically asking companies to voluntarily change their plans. And only if that fails, and we're in a true crisis situation, can the government issue binding instructions that companies are legally required to follow. And this is a really key point. It's not just about forcing companies to act. The law actually recognizes that this could be a huge burden. So it also includes plans for financial support for those businesses that cooperate with the government's requests and instructions. It's about working together.
So you might be wondering, how does this new approach compare to what other countries are doing? Putting Japan's plan into a global context really helps to highlight what makes it unique.
Looking around the world reveals some really different philosophies. Switzerland, for example, actually has a law that requires private companies to hold emergency stocks. And get this, they even stockpile coffee, not for nutrition, but for psychological comfort during a crisis, which is pretty amazing. Germany, on the other hand, keeps its own government stockpiles pretty small, but can legally order companies to ramp up supplies at the first sign of trouble. So you can see Japan is trying to create this kind of hybrid model, balancing private action with a flexible government-led response. So when you put it all together, Japan's strategy really is this clear, two-pronged approach. In peacetime, the goal is prevention, strengthening those supply chains before a crisis hits. But if and when an emergency happens, the focus shifts to resolution, using this new legal framework to manage the situation and get through it. And that brings us to the final big question. Japan has now clearly identified the risks and built this really comprehensive new plan, combining proactive diplomacy with a reactive legal safety net. But in a world that seems to be filled with growing uncertainty, from climate shocks to political tensions, the real test of this plan, well, it's yet to come. Is it enough to guarantee our food security for the future?
Okay, let's dive into this. We all think about what's for dinner, right? But have you ever really stopped to think about where that food actually comes from? I mean, really comes from. Today, we're going to peel back the layers on Japan's food supply and get into a really important concept: food self-sufficiency. So, to kick things off, I've got a question for you. Think about all the food energy consumed in Japan. Every single calorie. How much of that do you think comes from right here at home? Plus, get this, just 4 other countries. What's your guess? 50%? Maybe 60%? All right, you ready for this? The answer is a whopping 80%. Yep, you heard that right. 4/5 of all the food energy comes from domestic production and just 4 countries: the US, Australia, Canada, and Brazil. That means the entire rest of the globe, everyone else, only accounts for that last 20%. Kind of wild when you think about it. Wow, 80%? That really puts into perspective how much Japan relies on a pretty small group of suppliers. So that begs the question, how does Japan officially measure this? There's a key metric for this, so let's get into it. It's called the food self-sufficiency rate. And it's actually a pretty straightforward idea. At its core, it just measures one thing: what percentage of the food a country eats is actually produced right there, at home. Okay, But here's where things can get a little tricky. If you've ever heard about this topic, you might have seen different numbers thrown around. One report says one thing, another says something else. So what gives? Why the confusion? Well, it turns out there are two main ways to measure this. The first is called calorie-based. Think of it as the survival metric. It's all about the actual energy we get from food to live. The second way is production value-based. This one's all about the money. It looks at the economic value of the food produced. So, for example, high-value stuff like fancy vegetables or premium fruits, they might be low in calories, but they carry a lot of weight in this calculation. Okay, so let's look at the numbers for fiscal year 2023. Using that calorie-based method, and this is the number you'll probably see most often, Japan's self-sufficiency rate is 38%. Yeah, only 38%. That means just over a third of the actual energy people are consuming is grown domestically. But now watch this. If we switch over to the production value measurement, that number jumps all the way up to 61%. It's a huge difference, right? And it really shows you the economic strength of Japan's agriculture, especially with all that high-quality produce that sells for a good price. For the rest of this explainer, we're going to focus on that 38% calorie-based figure. It's the one that usually gets people talking and raises the most concerns. And it's been this way for a while. So the big question is, why? Why is it so low? And this isn't something that just happened overnight. I mean, if you go way back to the 1960s, the rate was up around 70 or 80%. But even looking more recently, you can see the slow decline. In 1998, it was 40%, and now it's down to 38%. It's really been a gradual slide over a long, long time. So what's driving this? What's the main culprit behind this decades-long decline? Well, according to an analysis from the Ministry of Agriculture, the answer is actually pretty simple, and it has everything to do with what's happening on our dinner plates. It's all about how Japanese eating habits have changed. Let's unpack that a bit. For one, people are eating a lot less rice, and rice is a crop where Japan is almost completely self-sufficient. At the exact same time, we're eating way more meat, dairy products, and using more fats and oils. And here's the kicker. To produce all that meat and dairy, you need a ton of animal feed, right? And much of that feed, things like corn and soybeans, has to be imported. That's the crucial connection. So there you have it. The heart of the issue is really tied to our modern diet, which leads us to the next big question. What's being done about it? How is Japan trying to tackle this heavy reliance on imports and, turn the ship around? Well, the main strategy is pretty direct. Just grow more of the stuff that's currently being imported. It's a laser focus on boosting the domestic production of key crops like wheat and soybeans. And this isn't just a theory, it's happening on the ground. Let's take a look at a fantastic example up in Hokkaido. There's a farming co-op that's completely changing the game for wheat farming. First, they're using smart crop rotation, planting soybeans in between wheat crops to keep the soil healthy. They've also gone high-tech with what's called smart agriculture. Think GPS-guided tractors that drive themselves for perfect precision. And on top of that, they're building better silos and drying facilities to handle bigger and better harvests. The goal here is crystal clear. Create a reliable, high-quality supply of Japanese wheat. Okay, so these efforts are really impressive. But what's the end game here? Why does all of this matter for the future of Japan's food security? At the end of the day, this isn't just about chasing a number on a chart. It's about something much bigger. It's about building a food system that can handle shocks. It's about making sure Japan isn't so vulnerable to unstable global markets, whether that's because of bad weather somewhere else, a trade dispute, or the effects of climate change. It's about guaranteeing a stable food supply for everyone, and at the same time, creating a stronger, more sustainable agricultural industry for generations to come. Which brings it all back to our dinner tables. The food we eat every day is the product of decades of change, and now it's at the center of national policy. So it leaves us with one final question to think about. With all this in motion, what do you think our dinner tables will look like in 10 years? When you picture Japanese agriculture, what comes to mind? Maybe those beautiful, serene rice paddies? Or maybe you've heard it's an industry in decline. But what if I told you that in 2023, Japan's agricultural output hit an all-time record high? It's a pretty stunning figure, right? But it hides a much more complex and, frankly, urgent story. A story of two deep crises that are threatening the very foundation of the nation's food supply. All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at those record-breaking numbers. Then, we're going to peel back the layers and dig into the two major crises facing the industry. After that, we'll explore the path forward, looking at new tech and new talent, before we wrap up with a really big question about the future. So first up, let's talk about that surprising headline number. On the surface, it really does tell a story of incredible success. And there it is. In 2023, Japan's agricultural output shot up to almost 9.5 trillion yen. But, this wasn't really because farmers were suddenly growing way more stuff. It was mostly driven by rising prices for key staples like rice and vegetables, and especially eggs, which saw some pretty major price hikes. And this wasn't happening in just one place. As you can see, Hokkaido up north is an absolute powerhouse, bringing in over 1.3 trillion yen all by itself. But you've also got strong performers way down south, like Kagoshima, and even areas closer to Tokyo, like Ibaraki. It really is a nationwide industry. But that record-breaking number, as impressive as it is, well, it doesn't tell the whole story. Let's peel back that layer, because underneath it all is a much, much more precarious reality. And that brings us to the big question, right? If the financial output is higher than it's ever been, where's the crisis? Well, it turns out there are two of them, and they are both pretty fundamental. The first crisis, it's not about money, it's not about crops, it's about people. Specifically, it's about who is working on Japan's farms, and, more importantly, who isn't. Just wrap your head around this number for a second. The average age of a core farmer in Japan, we're talking the main full-time workers here, is now over 69 years old. Just think about that. The huge physical demands of farming are being handled by a workforce that's, on average, closing in on 70. And this chart, wow, it just lays it all out. A staggering 71.7% of Japan's core farmers are over the age of 65. And the next generation, the folks under 50, they make up just a tiny sliver, a little over 11%. This isn't just an aging workforce, it's a workforce on the verge of retirement, with almost nobody in the pipeline to take their place. Now, to really put this into perspective, just look at the comparison with the United States. I mean, sure, American farmers are getting older too, with an average age of 58. But Japan's situation is just on another level. That demographic cliff is so much steeper, and it's creating a massive succession problem. Who is going to farm the land when this generation can't work anymore? Okay, so that's the people problem. The second crisis is all about efficiency. It's not just about who is doing the farming, it's also about how the farming is being done. This table is really revealing. It shows crop yields, basically how much food you can grow on the same patch of land. And for major crops like rice, wheat, and soybeans, Japan's yields are way lower than other big agricultural nations. While everyone else has been innovating to produce more and more, Japan's output per hectare has pretty much been standing still. And here's the real kicker. Those huge gains from mechanization that happened back in the day, they're long gone. For the last 2 decades, both labor and land productivity have basically flatlined. The whole industry is stuck, even as its workforce is about to age out completely. So, we have an aging workforce and stagnating productivity. It sounds pretty grim, right? But it's not the end of the story. Let's look at some of the solutions that are starting to pop up, because they offer a real path forward. A huge piece of the puzzle is technology, which is all grouped under this banner of smart agriculture, or sumato nogyo. This is all about using modern tools. We're talking drones, AI, sensors, robotics, to make farming less physically demanding and way more precise, efficient, and data-driven. And this isn't just some theory. Check this out. In Okayama, a farming cooperative is using drones to perfectly measure and level their rice paddies. Then they use a remote system, all controlled by a smartphone, to manage the water levels. This not only saves a ton of time and labor, but the best part is, the data it generates lets a brand new farmer get the same results as a seasoned expert. But of course, tech is only half the story. You also need new people. And this is where you get these incredible stories, like that of Mr. Yoshida Shiro Tateishi in Fukuoka. He was an office worker who just decided to completely switch careers. With 1 year of training, some financial support from the government, and, this is key, a lot of help from his local community, he launched a successful strawberry farm and even expanded it in just 3 years. And his words here, they really hit home. He says, "I am grateful to the community that accepted me. This just goes to show you a powerful truth. The future of farming isn't just about smart technology, it's about smart communities that actively support and welcome that next generation.
So, we've covered a lot of ground. We went from a record-breaking financial high down into the twin crises of an aging workforce and stalled productivity, and then back up to the hope being offered by new tech and new talent. It's a complex, challenging, but definitely not a hopeless situation.
And so it all comes down to this one final question. As Japan's largest generation of farmers gets ready to hang it up, that baton has to be passed. The question is, who's going to be there to grab it? Will technology and new farmers arrive fast enough to make a difference? Finding the answer to that is now the single most important challenge for Japan's food security.
All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're talking about something absolutely essential to Japan's future. It's farmland. This is a story about shrinking fields, an older generation of farmers, and the huge question of how a country is going to feed itself down the road. It's a big one, so let's get into it. First up, we're going to get a handle on just how big this problem is, how much farmland is vanishing. Then we'll look at the human story behind those numbers. After that, we'll explore Japan's big ideas to fix it, a community-led regional plan and a really clever system that connects land with new farmers. And to wrap it all up, we'll see how this is all changing the future of food in Japan.
So, just how serious is this? I mean, really? Let's start with the hard numbers. Okay, so right now, Japan has about 4.27 million hectares of agricultural land. It sounds like a lot, right? And it is. It's the very foundation of the country's food supply. But here's the thing, that foundation is cracking, and it's happening pretty fast. Get this. In the last year alone, Japan lost 25,000 hectares of farmland. To give you some perspective, that's an area bigger than the entire city of Osaka. Just gone. In 12 months. This isn't some slow drip. It's like a fire hose. And you have to understand, this is about way more than just empty fields. Every single hectare that disappears makes it that much harder for the country to maintain a stable food supply. It's a direct threat, really, to Japan's national food security. So the big question is, why? Why is this happening on such a massive scale? To really get it, we need to look past the land itself and focus on the people, the human factor. First, let's be super clear about what we're talking about. The official term is kohainochi, or abandoned farmland. Now, this isn't just a field that's taking a season off. No way. This is land that's gotten so wild and overgrown that you can't just waltz in and start planting. It takes a ton of work to bring it back. And the reasons it gets this way, they're deeply personal. It's not really about spreadsheets, it's about life. The main drivers are an aging farming population, a farmer getting sick or passing away, and a serious lack of young people who want to take over the family business. It all adds up to a major labor shortage. And this chart, wow, this visualizes the problem perfectly. In 2023, people worked their tails off to reclaim about 10,000 hectares of land, a huge effort. But in that same year, 25,000 new hectares were abandoned. We're losing ground more than twice as fast as we're gaining it back. Okay, so faced with this challenge, the government has rolled out a pretty major plan. Let's dig into this solution, because it's not some order from on high. It's a blueprint that's meant to be built by the communities themselves, from the ground up. It's called the Chiwi Keikaku, the regional plan. And the whole idea, the core of it, is to get local communities to sit down, have some really honest conversations, and figure out a shared vision for who's going to farm what land in the coming years. The whole thing really breaks down into 3 main steps. It all kicks off with community discussions, neighbors actually sitting down and talking it out. From there, they create something called a target map, which is basically a visual agreement on who farms what. And finally, the local town or city takes that community blueprint and makes it official. At the end of the day, this whole regional plan thing is about being proactive. It's about getting everybody on the same page to decide what happens to their land, so that no field gets left behind or forgotten. But a plan is only as good as the tools you have to actually make it happen. So let's look at the key engine that turns these community blueprints into reality. It's called the Nochi Bank, or Farmland Bank. And honestly, the best way to think about it is as a public matchmaker for agriculture. It steps in as the middleman, leasing land from owners who can't farm anymore, and then renting it out to new, motivated farmers, or even to companies. And the benefits here are huge. The bank doesn't just pass land along, it actually transforms it. It can take a bunch of small, scattered plots and bundle them into one big, efficient farm. This makes modern farming way easier, it cuts costs, it stops land from going idle in the first place, and it opens the door for new people to get into farming. And this isn't just an idea on paper. In Oita Prefecture, for example, this very system helped turn these abandoned, overgrown citrus groves into a booming olive farm. Think about that. One project revived the land, created totally new local products, and brought jobs to the area. It's a perfect snapshot of how this can work. Okay, so we've seen the problem and we've looked at the solutions, but the million-dollar question is it actually working? In this last section, let's check out the progress report and see what's next. Now, this number, 60.4%, is a really big deal. I know, on its own, it might not look like much, but in the world of Japanese agriculture, this represents a massive, massive shift. So what is this 60.4%? It's the amount of farmland that's now being managed by Japan's main full-time agricultural players. It shows this huge move away from tiny, fragmented plots and toward larger, more efficient farms. This is the hard evidence that all these consolidation efforts, they're actually paying off. This timeline really puts that progress into perspective. The whole farmland bank system only started back in 2014. And by 2023, they'd already blown past that 60% milestone. And the next big deadline is right around the corner, March 2025. That's when all communities are supposed to have their regional plans locked in. So what's the big takeaway here? Well, the effort to save Japan's farmland isn't about some single magic policy. It's a combination of everything. Planning that starts at the community level, smart systems like the Farmland Bank, and of course, the hard work of the farmers themselves. And that really brings us to our final thought. This whole story is about making sure there's a future for food. And it kind of makes you wonder, right? Beyond just what's on the shelf at the grocery store, who's thinking about the future of agriculture where you live? What does the future of food look like in your own backyard? Welcome to The Explainer. So in Japan, there's this quiet crisis happening right out in the open, in its fields. The people who actually grow the nation's food, they're disappearing. So today, we're going to dig into how Japan is turning to robots, AI, and this really radical new national plan to answer one simple but absolutely vital question. And that question is this: who is going to grow our food tomorrow? See, Japan's agricultural workforce isn't just shrinking, it's aging and fast. I mean, with every single year that goes by, there are fewer and fewer hands to tend the fields. And that raises this massive question about the future of food in, one of the most advanced nations on the planet. All right, let's really get into the weeds on this one. At its heart, the problem is a full-blown demographic crisis, and it's hitting one of the most essential industries there is. And believe me, the numbers, they're pretty stark. Basically, you've got an aging workforce and almost no young people stepping up to take their place. So just keeping food production where it is right now, that's becoming a huge, huge task. Japan has to figure out a way to get way more out of every single piece of land. And that, well, that's going to require a really radical shift. So how in the world does a country solve a crisis like this? Well, Japan is betting the farm, pun intended, on technology. They're kicking off a high-tech revolution right there on the farmland, and they're calling it smart agriculture. And look, this isn't some far-off sci-fi dream. This is a revolution that's happening in fields and greenhouses as we speak. What we're really talking about here is using data and automation to make farming smarter, faster, and way more sustainable. Okay, so what are we actually talking about? These are the tools of the modern farmer. We're talking automated robot tractors that can drive themselves through the fields. AI that's so smart it can predict a disease outbreak before it even happens. You've got IoT sensors managing water right from a smartphone. And drones spraying crops with just incredible accuracy. The whole point is to make farming less about backbreaking labor and a whole lot more about data. And get this, look at how fast this is catching on. In 2023 alone, drones sprayed pesticides and fertilizers over almost 1.1 million hectares. Now, to give you an idea of how big that is, we're talking about an area larger than the entire country of Jamaica. This is not some little niche experiment, folks. This is going mainstream at an absolutely incredible speed. Okay, so that all sounds great, but does it actually work? I mean, it's one thing to talk about cool tech, but it's another thing to see if it delivers results out in the real world. To figure that out, the Japanese government launched this massive project, the Smart Agriculture Demonstration Project, all across the country at 217 different sites. And the results that came back, honestly, they were astounding. Just imagine cutting the time you spend watering your crops by 80%. That's exactly what these automated systems did. Drone sprayers, they slashed labor by over 60%. And even simpler tech like straight assist rice transplanters made a real dent, cutting time by 18%. We're not talking about small tweaks here. This is fundamentally changing the entire workload on the farm.
And here's the kicker, especially for rice farming, which is, a huge staple of the Japanese diet. These projects proved this incredible dual benefit. On average, smart tech led to a 9% reduction in work time, and at the same time, a 9% increase in the final harvest. Think about that. Farmers are literally working less and producing more. That's the dream, right?
So, with all these incredible successes, you might be wondering, why isn't every single farm in Japan smart yet? Well, there are some very real, very big hurdles to clear before that can happen. First off, the cost. The price tag on one of these robotic tractors can be, well, astronomical. And even if a farm can somehow afford it, you still need people with the skills to operate and maintain it. On top of that, you've got the layout of the farms themselves. A lot of traditional farms have these narrow rows that are perfect for people, but they just can't fit a big new autonomous machine. And for the really tricky stuff, like picking strawberries, the tech just isn't quite there yet. This quote from a broccoli farm really hits the nail on the head. To get their new automatic harvester to work right, they couldn't just, buy the machine and plug it in. They had to change the actual variety of broccoli they grew to one with a longer stem, and they had to completely rethink their entire harvesting method. It just goes to show you, real success means adapting the farm to the tech, not just trying to jam the tech into the farm. All right, so to break through these barriers, the Japanese government is stepping in and taking direct action. They're not just sitting around hoping for change. They're basically mandating it with a brand new national strategy that just kicked off in October 2024. It's called the Smart Agriculture Technology Promotion Law. And what it does is create this big national framework. The goal is simple: support the farmers who are adopting the tech and support the companies who are developing it. You see how that creates this awesome positive feedback loop for innovation? And this two-pronged approach is really the genius of it. So on one side, it helps farmers, the ones who are willing to innovate their whole system, like that broccoli farm we talked about. It gives them support with things like tax breaks and financial aid. Then on the other side, it gives incentives to tech companies to go out and build the specific tools that farmers are telling them they actually need. And the government isn't messing around. They've set some seriously ambitious targets. By 2030, they want all the key smart ag tech to be ready for prime time, for real-world use. But listen to this. This is the big one. A 60% reduction in the human labor needed for fruit and tea harvesting. We're talking about the most back-breaking, time-consuming jobs in the entire industry. Hitting a target like that would be an absolute game changer. So where is all this heading? What's the end game? Well, the ultimate vision isn't just about having a few cool high-tech farms scattered around. No, it's about building an entire agricultural ecosystem, one that's completely connected, totally sustainable, and incredibly productive. A really key part of the strategy is this idea of shifting from ownership to utilization, and they're doing that by promoting what are called agricultural support service providers. You can basically think of it as farming as a service. So instead of a small farmer having to shell out a ton of money for a fancy drone, they can just hire a service to come in and do the spraying for them. It's a brilliant way for farmers to get access to all this cutting-edge tech without that massive upfront cost. And this is the digital backbone that ties it all together. It's a platform called Wagri. The best way to think about it is like a universal language for all this farm tech. It allows the drone, the soil sensors, and the weather app to all talk to each other, to share information, and to work together perfectly. It's what truly makes data the most valuable crop of all. So is this the future we'll all see on our tables? What's happening in Japan's fields is so much more than just a story about cool technology. It's really a glimpse into the future for a lot of other developed nations that are facing these exact same demographic problems. Japan is pretty much pioneering a whole new model for how to feed a country in the 21st century. So the real question isn't just when this revolution will arrive on our plates, but who's going to be next to follow their lead. If you found this explainer interesting, and I hope you did, please go ahead and subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. It really helps us out and lets us know you want more content like this.